Welcome back everybody to day 2 of Socitm 2014 conference. Hands up how many of you are now wishing you gone to bed a little earlier last night, perhaps. Any of you who are feeling rather the worse for wear today, you can take some comfort in the fact that, again, this is a perfect venue for you to be in, because like Manchester United, you have absolutely no defence. We've got another packed morning of speakers for you this morning, and in a short while I'll introduce you to your first keynote speaker this morning, who is Yvonne Gallagher from the National Audit Office, who has the very interesting job title of Director of Digital Value for Money. So hopefully, with a job title like that, she's going to tell you exactly how to deliver digital value for money. So that should be a great session with her. Before that, though, if you'll permit me, I was chatting to Nick last night, Nick Roberts, your president, and Nick asked me if I would be happy just to talk for 5 minutes, 5-10 minutes at the start of today, just to give a little personal perspective on what's happening in public sector IT at the moment, as somebody who's been observing what's been going on for a long time and sort of stand slightly outside it as an observer, which I'm happy to do. I'll warn you, this is completely unrehearsed, and literally Nick asked me to do this about 7 o'clock last night. If Nick is sitting in the front, I've told him if this is getting boring, he's going to be going like this. If all of you are going like that, then I know I've really got trouble. But I want to just give you a few little thoughts, which I hope you'll find interesting. Now, as a journalist and as an editor, I've always been of the belief that context is everything. In my game as a journalist, context is what turns a news story into a really interesting news story. Context is what happened, is what gives something that has happened, and it tells you why it's happened and what it means and what's happening around it. It's what brings the interest and life into a story. So I'd just like to come at public sector IT by giving what I think is a little bit of context to what is going on in the wider IT world, which I think gives the context to a lot of what's happening to you at the moment. So I'll sort of try and talk about public sector IT without talking about public sector IT. And I think what's so interesting about the changes that everybody is seeing at the moment is that if you look back over the history of technological innovation, by technological I mean in its broadest sense, everything from a steam engine to a toaster to a smartphone, you can see a repeating pattern throughout history, following on from technological innovation. Now, we've all heard one of the buzzwords at the moment everybody talks about is disruption and disruptive change. And again, we're so fond in this industry of IT, in IT, aren't we, of coming up with buzzwords and jargon and trying to put labels on things without really understanding what we mean. Digital is another example of that. Mark Thompson yesterday asking what does digital mean to you, and in 30 seconds had four completely different definitions for it. Now, when we talk about disruption, really, I think at least what most people are talking about with disruption is an accelerated period of change caused by something typically related to technology. And if you look back through the history of technological innovation, you can see a number of those. You see a regular recurring pattern of a period of relative stability, then a period of disruption and great change caused by technology, followed by a period of stability, followed by a period of change. And there's a bit of a fallacy that's grown up over the years around this, that people generally consider that the catalyst for this period of accelerated change is some great invention, the emergence of some great new technology. Somebody invents something, and that causes great change. Well, that's not. If you really study it, that's not actually the case. If you look back, to the Industrial Revolution, to take a start with, for example, arguably the technology that more than anything catalysed the Industrial Revolution was the steam engine. Now, steam engines had been around for decades before the Industrial Revolution took hold. What was actually the catalyst for the Industrial Revolution was when James Watt took a steam engine and commoditised it. He made it small enough and cheap enough to be mass-produced, and it was that act of commoditisation of the technology that was the catalyst for that huge period of social and business change that we now call the Industrial Revolution. And if you follow through history and look at other technological examples, it's always this process of commoditisation that is actually the catalyst for great change. If you look at the age of electricity, the development of toasters and appliances and so forth, that didn't happen when Benjamin Franklin ran through a field holding up a lightning conductor. It happened after the life of Thomas Edison and the Westinghouse family commoditised the provision of electricity. They made the provision of electricity cheap and affordable on a mass market. If you look at the revolution in transport, it didn't happen when Messrs Daimler and Benz invented the internal combustion engine and made the first motor car. It happened when Henry Ford commoditised the production of motor cars, made them cheap enough and enough scale to appeal to the mass market. And if you now come forward and look at the last 20 years in IT, and look at it from that perspective, I would argue it starts to open up some interesting different perspectives. Arguably over the last 20 years, the most disruptive technology that we've seen is the internet. What is the internet? Really, the internet is little more than the commoditisation of networking and communications. It's taken something that used to be very expensive, very specialised, and made it absolutely ubiquitous, totally cheap, and massively mass market. And what's happened as a result of that? Well, we've seen enormous innovation. That commoditisation has provided a base for people to find new ways of doing things, new approaches to things. And we've all seen how that has transformed a number of industries. You can see what's happened to retail, what's happened in the industry I work in media. And the reason that's happened is because that commoditisation has broken down historic barriers to entry. In retail, the barrier to entry was a shop. You had to have a lot of money to be able to go into retail to afford a shop. In the media industry, it was a printing press. You had to have a lot of money to become a publisher because you needed to afford to have a printing press or access to a printing press. And we've all seen what's happened to companies that have not responded to that mass commoditisation. I'm sure you can all reel off the names: Woolworths, Comet, Blockbuster, HMV, and so on. All these formerly household names that for one reason or another, were unable to respond to that transformation. So what's happening? If you look then what's happening after the internet, if you look at there's a few of you now on your phones looking at there. If you look at what we in IT have tended to call consumerisation of IT, the ubiquity of smartphones and tablets among the populace at large, that really is little more than the commoditisation of end-user computing. We've put low cost, very powerful technology into the hands of everybody. That's causing a whole new era of innovation. App stores, mobile applications, mobile payments, things like this would simply not have been possible before. That's happened because of the commoditisation of that technology. If you look at cloud, arguably the next period of transformation, cloud is just the commoditisation of large-scale computing power and storage. That's really all it is. For all of the ways it's pitched to you by IT suppliers, it's the commoditisation of large-scale storage. Again, that is going to be a massive catalyst for innovation. Arguably, the next phase that you're going to get in this is what we, in the jargon terms, refer to as big data. Big data is the commoditisation of information. It's making massive amounts of information available at very, very low cost to an enormous audience, and it's going to cause huge disruption and huge innovation. So what we're going through now is undoubtedly a period of accelerated change. I would argue we're still in the early days of it. That period of accelerated change has been caused by commoditisation. Now, why is that important? The reason it's important is because what history tells us throughout all these periods of technological commoditisation is that those changes are inevitable and they are unstoppable. I'm sure there are plenty of apocryphal articles you can read now about the board of HMV 10 years ago saying people will never want to buy music from the internet. They're always wanting to browse around a record store. They absolutely believed that as the biggest music retailer at that time, but the changes that happened in their industry were inevitable and unstoppable. Retail and media are two great examples. I've often heard sometimes people come back and say, what about financial services? That hasn't really been disrupted that much. Financial services has been temporarily saved from that disruption by the crash. By the crash in 2008, we had a massive increase in regulation in the sector, and it's almost impossible to have new entrants and new ways of doing things in a highly regulated environment. Now those regulations are starting to be eased, and now governments are starting to realise they need greater competition within financial services. Just in the last year alone, we've seen a start of a big burst of innovation coming into financial services. New payment services on mobile phones, services that are starting to bypass the banks in terms of being able to transfer money between people. In Germany, there's a start-up bank that's been going for a few years now, which is colloquially known as the Facebook bank, because it does almost all of its business through Facebook. It even has a savings plan where the level of interest on the savings plans is determined by how many likes it gets on Facebook. These sort of innovations are coming to financial services. So what does this mean for you? What does this mean for public sector IT? Well, arguably, the public sector, clearly more than any other sector, has the biggest barrier of entry of all. If I want to disrupt, come and disrupt the public sector and come in with new ways of doing things, generally speaking, in history, that's called a revolution. It's not something that happens gradually and over time. I can't come along and say, I don't want my local council, I'm going to set up a competitive local council and deliver services better than my local council. So this is an environment that's been entirely protected. And as a result, and this is not a criticism in any way, when an environment is protected, you inevitably get a much higher degree of inertia. The forces holding you back from change are much higher than the forces driving you towards change. Now, again, arguably, austerity perhaps has been the catalyst for starting to overcome some of that inertia. If you look at central government, I think there was a realisation of the scale of inertia. They realised they couldn't, there was no way you're going to have startups coming in and trying to disrupt government by doing government in a different way. So what they did, I don't think they used those terms at the time, but I think if you look back at it, it was very much the case. What they did in Whitehall 5 years ago, 3.5 years ago, was they created its own startup. They happened to call it the Government Digital Service. They effectively created a startup within government whose premise was absolutely to do exactly what startups have done in retail and media and other industries, and to come in and annoy people and to do things differently and to show people how differently things can be done as a result of commoditised technology. I would argue there are two things in particular that GDS have done that have been the most important things. One is they've re-established the importance of having IT and technical skills within the organisation rather than out of the organisation, rather than outsourcing it. They've realised that in what we now call digital government, you need to have those skills as close to internally and as close to the cold face as you possibly can. I was literally just sitting there before I stood up reading a story that somebody else has published today, saying that Liverpool County Council has just insourced all its IT back from BT. Now, I don't know if there's anybody from Liverpool here, but you might be familiar with Liverpool Direct. It was held up for many years as a great example of private-public partnership, of this joint venture between BT and Liverpool. But it actually turned out that when it came to austerity, and after a few years into this, and Liverpool needed to continually cut costs, well, you can't continually cut costs if you're an outsourcing arrangement, because if you need to take 30% of your costs, that supplier is not going to take 30% off their profit. So one of the things GDS has done is re-establish the importance of in-house skills. I think the other thing it's done is established, to use their terminology, they've established the importance of show, don't tell. What they have done, and you'll be hearing from Tom Loosemore this afternoon, who's one of Mike Bracken's deputy at GDS, and I'm sure he will talk about this. They haven't gone out and tried to convince people of why you should let us do this. They haven't gone out and said, and engaged consultants to come in at 50 grand a project to explain to the senior people why they should be doing this. They just did it. Tom Loosemore was initially in charge of what was at the time called AlphaGov, was what became gov.uk, and they just went on and built a website. They barely even told anybody they were doing it. They just did it, and then they went out and showed people. And they said, look what we've done. Isn't this better than what we've currently got? It was certainly much cheaper, and look how quickly we've done it. And by showing people what they do, that has started to be a massive catalyst for change. Why is this arguably important to yourselves? Within local government, the challenge in central government has always been breaking down silos. Mark Thompson was talking about it yesterday. The challenge for local government clearly is double silos. It's not just you've got silos within your own organisations of the various different service groups that you have in your organisations. You've also got the silos in between different local authorities as well. There's a huge complexity added to that by having not just to get people working better within your organisation, but to get people working better across all your organisations. It's going to be very hard it's almost impossible for a start-up to come in and disrupt that. And a lot of the discussion around local GDS, I think, has been to do with that. But what I would say is that same concept is inevitable. That same idea of an accelerated period of change. And why you might not have a GDS, what I would say to all of you is that your opportunity is to be the startup. You as the senior IT people within local authorities, yours is the opportunity to be the startup that disrupts the way that local services are provided. Because Mark Thompson said yesterday, digital doesn't happen without a fight, and I think he's probably right. But what I'd also add to that is even if it only happens with a fight, it is also inevitable and it is going to happen. And I would certainly encourage all of you to be the people who are leading that. So that was my perspectives. I hope that was of some interest. On with the rest of the day. Thanks for listening. Our first speaker this morning, our keynote, as I mentioned earlier on, Yvonne Gallagher, Director of Digital Value for Money at the National Audit Office, talking about changing the face of public services. Yvonne, hand over to you. Thanks very much.